On land, worms are soft, pink, and harmless. You step on them by accident and feel bad about it. But put a worm in the ocean, and something changes. One species grows 10 feet long and snaps fish in half with retractable jaws. Another one lives on the walls of underwater volcanoes where the water hits 176 degrees. And a third one has no mouth, no stomach, and no eyes, but it melts through whale skeletons using acid. The ocean didn't just change worms. It turned them into predators that shouldn't exist. The worm responsible for the snapping fish in half part has a name, Eunice aphroditois. You probably know it as the bobbit worm, and it lives buried beneath the ocean floor with only its antennae exposed. The rest of its body, sometimes stretching over 3 meters, coils through sand and sediment like a living tripwire. It has no eyes, no brain worth mentioning. Just 5 sensory antennae poking above the surface, reading vibrations and chemical traces in the water the way a spider reads its web. When a fish drifts close enough, the bobbit worm launches upward and clamps down with a pair of hardened, scissor-like jaws that retract faster than most animals can react. Those jaws are mineralized with zinc and manganese, making them some of the hardest biological structures any worm has ever produced. The strike pulls the fish below the sand before the prey even registers what happened. Researchers observing bobbit worms off the coast of Indonesia have watched them snap fish clean in half on the first grab. The jaws can also inject a toxin that stuns larger prey, preventing escape even when the initial bite does not sever the body completely. And it gets worse if the bobbit worm misses. Prey fish that survive an initial attack develop behavioral responses. A 2016 study published on Science Daily documented reef fish in Indonesia actively mobbing bobbit worm burrows, blasting jets of water into the sand to force the worm to retreat. The fish had learned to recognize the burrows and treat them as threats, the same way small birds harass hawks. That means the bobbit worm is so effective as an ambush predator that entire reef communities have evolved counter-strategies just to deal with it. Aquarium hobbyists have discovered bobbit worms the hard way too. These worms sometimes hitch a ride into home aquariums hidden inside live rock, a chunk of coral reef substrate sold at pet stores. The worm stays buried, invisible, and slowly picks off fish one by one over weeks or months. Owners notice their fish population dropping but cannot figure out why until they tear the tank apart and find a meter-long worm coiled inside the substrate. Online aquarium forums are full of these horror stories. This hunting technique is not new either. Fossil evidence published in Scientific Reports in 2021 revealed 20-million-year-old burrow traces in northeastern Taiwan that match bobbit worm behavior almost exactly. The trace fossils, classified as a new ichnogenus called Penicnus, show L-shaped tunnels up to 2 meters long with feather-like collapse structures around the top. Those collapse patterns match what happens when a modern bobbit worm lunges out of its burrow and drags struggling prey underground. So this ambush strategy has been working for at least 20 million years, which tells you something about how effective it is. Now, the bobbit worm is frightening because of what it does to other animals. The Pompeii worm is frightening because of where it lives. Alvinella pompeiana was first identified in 1980 by French marine biologist Daniel Desbruyères and Lucien Laubier. They found it clinging to the walls of hydrothermal vent chimneys on the Pacific Ocean floor, in places where superheated water blasts out of the Earth's crust at temperatures that would cook you in seconds. The worm gets its name from the ancient city of Pompeii, buried by Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, and the comparison is accurate. This worm builds paper-thin tubes directly on the chimney walls and lives inside them while volcanic fluid roars past. The temperature gradient across a single Pompeii worm's body is staggering. Its tail end sits in water measured at around 80 degrees Celsius, roughly 176 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature of a fresh cup of coffee. Meanwhile, its head and feathery gills poke out into water closer to 22 degrees Celsius. That means there can be a 60-degree temperature difference between one end of the worm and the other. No other animal on Earth is known to tolerate that kind of thermal gradient across its own body. How does it survive? Part of the answer is symbiotic bacteria. The Pompeii worm cultivates a dense mat of bacteria on its back, and according to the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, those bacteria likely serve as both a food source and a form of thermal insulation. The bacteria are chemosynthetic, meaning they convert chemicals from the vent sunlight. The worm feeds on them, and in return, the bacteria get a stable surface to colonize right next to their chemical food source. The worm's own biology is extreme, too. According to a genome study published in PMC, the Pompeii worm's DNA has a higher ratio of guanine base pairs compared to related species. That matters because GC pairs form triple hydrogen bonds instead of double, making the DNA strand more heat stable. Its connective tissues contain specialized proteins that resist denaturing at temperatures that would unravel most animal cells. Controlled lab experiments have shown that prolonged exposure above 50 to 55 degrees Celsius is lethal, which means the worm probably shuttles between the hot and cool zones of its tube rather than parking in the extreme heat permanently. But even that shuttling behavior is extraordinary for any animal. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. New deep dives on overlooked animal biology drop regularly. The third worm is different from the other two. The bobbit worm is a predator. The Pompeii worm is a survivor. The zombie worm is a recycler, and it does its job in one of the strangest ways in the entire animal kingdom. Osedax, which translates to bone devourer in Latin, was discovered in February 2002 by researchers at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. They sent an ROV called Tiburon down into Monterey Canyon off the California coast and found something unexpected on the skeleton of a dead gray whale sitting at a depth of nearly 3,000 meters. The bones were covered in small flower-like organisms, with red plumes and green root-like structures burrowing into the bone itself. Nobody had ever seen anything like them before. The reason nobody had seen them is that Osedax breaks every rule you think you know about how animals eat. It has no mouth, no stomach, no gut of any kind. It has no eyes. What it does have are root-like tissues that penetrate whalebone, and those roots secrete acid. According to researchers at UC San Diego, the roots contain high concentrations of an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, which catalyzes the production of acid strong enough to dissolve the mineral matrix of bone. The worm bores into the skeleton the same way tree roots crack through concrete, except chemically, and much faster. Once the acid opens channels into the bone, symbiotic bacteria living inside the worm's root tissues take over. These bacteria, from the order Oceanospirillales, break down the fats and proteins locked inside the whalebone and convert them into nutrients the worm can absorb. The worm has no digestive system of its own. It outsources the entire process to bacteria that live inside it. Without those bacteria, the worm would starve sitting on top of a mountain of food. The reproductive biology of Osedax is equally bizarre. The large visible worms with the red plumes are all female. The males are microscopic, reduced to tiny sacs of sperm that live inside the female's tube. A single female can harbor dozens of these dwarf males. They never develop mouths or digestive systems either. Their sole purpose is reproduction, and they survive by absorbing nutrients directly through their skin from the yolk reserves they were born with. Whale falls, the carcasses of dead whales that sink to the ocean floor, are rare events. A single whale fall can sustain a community of organisms for decades. Osedax is one of the primary recyclers in that ecosystem, breaking down bone that almost nothing else can access. Without zombie worms and their bacterial partners, whale skeletons would persist on the ocean floor for centuries, locking away nutrients that an entire deep-sea food web depends on. And Osedax is not limited to whales. Researchers have found them feeding on the bones of fish, sea turtles, and even cow bones placed experimentally on the seafloor. The acid root system works on vertebrate bone in general, not just cetacean skeletons. That means wherever a large animal dies and sinks in the deep ocean, zombie worms are likely already there waiting. According to the Smithsonian, fossil evidence suggests that Osedax or something very similar has been consuming marine bones for tens of millions of years, long before modern whale species even existed. 3 worms. One hunts by ambush with mineralized jaws that have worked for 20 million years. One farms bacteria on the walls of underwater volcanoes and survives temperature swings that would kill any other animal. And one dissolves the skeletons of the largest creatures that ever lived, using acid and borrowed bacteria, without a mouth or a stomach or a single eye. Landworms get stepped on. Ocean worms break the rules of biology. If you want more stories like this, they are already on the channel.